Welcome to YMT220 Economics. We are still speaking about Chapter 7. We spoke about the first part, consumers, producers, and the efficiency of markets. So we discussed the buyers or the consumer surplus and its relation to the demand curve. Now we will speak about the producer surplus and its relation to the producer surplus, and then we will conclude by discussing the efficiency of the market and addressing the issues related to it. Now, before we proceed, we said earlier that we usually address a common interest of people, which is for buyers paying less for an item or for goods or services, and for goods or services, and for the consumer, for the producers actually willing to have higher prices or being interested in having more amount to be received. So let's just discuss what we consider as a cost to sellers. Now, the cost to sellers is anything they have to give up to produce the goods or services. And remember the opportunity cost, whatever must be given up in that case to obtain some item or to get some item. Now, a producer may not just pay money to produce a product. Think about other resources like electricity, water, rental, all these things. How about time, effort? So all of these are also considered as a cost. You may think of them as money by converting them to some money. Some people say like, okay, my hour costs this much, my effort costs this much, my skills, all these things. So not just money paid or the cost of raw material. No, there are other factors to be included in the cost, okay? So now let's just think about three sellers of lawn cutting. It's a service provided by some labor. So in that case, we may think about the willingness to sell. What does it mean? It means if we have a price, okay, that exceeds the willingness to sell of someone, then that person would sell the price. So it means it exceeds, likely it will exceed its cost or his cost in that case. So a seller will produce actually and sell if the good or service only if it exceeds the cost of that seller, okay? And this is what we refer to by the willingness to sell, okay? So the willingness to sell of a seller is actually setting the base where the seller would sell or not. Why? Because of cost consideration, if it is below his cost or above his cost or her cost, okay? Now let's just take the simple example. We have these three guys for lawn or whatever, lawn cutting. These three persons offering lawn cutting, one for 10, 20, 30. So you may think about different prices offered by different persons. And in that case, what we can do, we can create the schedule for Jack, Janet, and Chrissy. And in that case, think about the opposite to the demand curve. Demand curve, we started higher than the highest price, and then we went down as a staircase from up to down. Now we will go from lower than the lowest price, from 0 to lower than the lowest price. Now look at the lowest price here is Jack, 10. So we go from 0 to 9, one less than this price here. We will get no selling at all. Then you can move from 10 to one less than the next one. Then you can move from 20 to one less than the third one here, and then 35 and above. So we will have all our market in this case represented, and this is just a virtual representation because there is no market only with three persons. That's not possible, not likely to happen. I mean, in competitive markets we will have thousands of buyers and sellers, maybe not, if not millions, okay? So this is the idea here. We represent it by the supply schedule, and as you can see, it is going from 0 to upward, not from max or whatever highest price downward like the demand. This is exactly the opposite. And if you remember, previously we explained about the demand curve is going from up to down and the supply is going from down to up. It's like an X somewhere, and that is how we represent it in this case. We have a staircase very similar to demand, but is going from upwards, okay, like this, from 0 to up, from 1 to up, from 2 to up, 3 to up, which means here quantity. That means the quantity sold, those who are offering their service, right? So we will go stair. Initially we have 0 until we reach to 10, then we have 1 until we reach 20, then we have 2 until we reach 35, then we have 3, and that's all the sellers in the market. So willingness to sell, it determines who is going to sell, produce and sell the item or a service or a product, okay? So in that case, look at this. This threshold actually allows the first person to produce and sell, but not others, not any others, because their willingness to sell is higher than this. If we move forward, if we move a little bit more, if we reach 20, then we will have 2 persons. Why? The threshold of willingness to sell covers both of them. And the same goes to the rest. We can move the second, third threshold and fourth threshold and so on, okay? So in that case, what's the idea? Again, we have a marginal seller. A marginal seller is a seller that if the price of the service or a good is any less than that price, this person would leave. So think about this one, 10. If any less than 10, this seller will say, I'm not going to sell it. So I'm not going to earn, I will not sell it. Think about 20. Here we have a marginal seller, 20. If it is less than 20, this marginal seller will leave. So the seller who would leave if the market price were any lower. So any lower than 20, any lower than 35, and it could be any lower price based on, I mean, mass, number of people, not just 1 or 2. We speak about sometimes hundreds of thousands of buyers, sellers, okay? So this is for Jack, Jeanette, and that is for Chrissy. These are like the thresholds, and we refer to them by marginal sellers. So in that case, this is a marginal seller here at the price 35, marginal seller at the price of 20, the marginal seller at the price of 10. Okay, so what's the producer surplus? We spoke about the consumer surplus, and we explained about it, that it is the benefit that the buyer gets from the market, and we calculated it by subtracting the willingness to pay minus the actual price. Now we do something similar to it, but in the opposite way. Is actually subtracting the actual price from the cost. We explain about the cost. So the actual price, if a person is selling his service or good by $10, then what is its cost to you? Maybe 5. So we subtract, okay, the price 10 minus 5, then we get the total producer surplus in this case. All right. So if we think about it, we need to get a price. If the price is 25, so the average price of lawn cutting as a service to the community or to this market is 25. It's an assumption, okay? Now you may think about raw material, you may think about the fuel used by the machine, you may think about the time, effort, all these come together, okay? So if the price is 25 now, while this person, it's higher than his price, and in that case, well, he wouldn't be offering the service in that case, but I'm sorry, it's higher than his cost. He would be offering the service in that case. What did I say earlier? I think I got my mind messed up. Let me repeat, because I got myself confused with the demand. Here we were telling about the producer surplus. I got myself confused with the demand curve. I will just rephrase it. It's not below, actually. We speak about higher. Below. In that case, we speak about demand, not supply. Okay, I'm very sorry. Usually these things happen while speaking about both demand and supply. Now we are speaking about the supply. If the price is higher than the cost, because what matters here is the cost actually. If the price is higher than my cost, then I can sell my service or good. If it is not, I cannot. It will be lost to me. So here the price matters, it should be higher than the cost. That's the exact point. I just got confused for a moment with the demand. So here, if we have a price of 25, what do we have? It's higher than 10, it's higher than 20. So in that case, we have two sellers are willing and able to sell their service, and we can think about the producer surplus. Now look, the area below the price, not above the price, below the price, exactly opposite to the demand curve, and above the demand in the supply curve. Okay, so we have this for Jack, we have this for Jeanette, and in that case we have total. We can sum up these two squares and get the total producer surplus. Now look at Chrissy. In this case, Chrissy will not be able to sell his service. Why? The price is lower than his own cost, and usually if a seller has the price lower than his own cost, wouldn't go for selling. Now we speak about usual circumstances, not like exceptionals in the market. Sometimes people sell even lower than their own cost for some reasons. We are not addressing these reasons now. We are addressing just the normal circumstances of a market. So if we sum them up, if we sum up the total producer surplus, in this case we will get 20. How? Now look, this is a rectangle, okay, or you can call it square if you like, whatever. In this case, if the height and the width are equal, or the length and the width. Now 10 times 1, that's 10. How about this? Now look, here we have 2 times, here we have 5, that's also 10. So we have this rectangle here, and we have this one. If you sum them up, that's 20. Okay, so in that case, you may think about the total in this case. If you want, you can subtract and sum up. Now, how do we subtract and sum up? Now look at Jack, for example. The price is 25, so that's minus the cost, that's 15. How about Jeanette? The price is 25 minus 20, that's 5. If you sum up 15 plus 5, that's exactly 20, exactly as calculating these two areas and summing them up. So usually we don't calculate individuals because this is just a limited example, illustration example. We have only 3 resellers, and in that case we can sum them up. Rather, usually we calculate the area below the price and above the demand, sorry, the supply curve. Okay, so that's it. That's exactly the idea how we calculate it. Usually we have this kind of smooth supply curve. Why? Because we speak about hundreds of thousands of sellers, and in that case what we are going to do is having an area above the supply curve and below the price. Think about this number as a mass number, like we can multiply it by 1,000 or 10,000 or maybe 100,000, it depends. Okay, and here the price. So if we think about again the shoes example, so we have the pair of shoes, the price, and we have the quantity demanded. Now let's just assume that the price is 40, and at the price of 40 the demand is centralized around 25. So in that case, if we say the marginal seller cost is 30, so we have a marginal seller cost 30, that's around 15,000 pair of shoes. Okay, and if we want to calculate the producer surplus in that case, now the total surplus is $10. In this case, 40 minus 30. Okay, now if you want to calculate the consumer surplus based on that assumption, now remember that we said the total consumer surplus is the area below the price and above the supply curve. Now what we have here is the price of 40. We have the base 40 minus 15, that's 25, and then we have the height. that is a 25. From 0 to 25, that's 25. So you multiply the base times the height, that's 25 times 25 divided by 2, that's 312.5, and that's the total producer surplus. And if I say consumer, remember that we are speaking about producer, because I may make this mistake verbally, I mean. Okay, so if a lower price is imposed, or if the price falls, what happens? Now, if the price falls, two things will happen. The first thing is some resellers will leave the market, and another case or another effect, other sellers who are still there will get less money. So what will happen? In this case, we will have two effects to be studied. Now look at the first one. If the price is 30, that means it falls from 40 to 30. What happens? Look at these two areas. Now the first one is this one. Fall in the producer surplus due to some sellers leaving the market. Okay, this is a triangle. And the second area, or the second part, is actually the fall in the total producer surplus due to other sellers here receiving a lower price, not 40, 30. That means it's a loss to them, or actually lower income to them. Okay, and we usually ask about these questions. We ask some questions about those, very similar to a demand or the the consumer surplus. All right. So let's just take a practical example. Find marginal seller's cost at quantity 10. So quantity 10 intersects it with the supply curve. Now we have 20. So the price would be 20. This is the marginal price in this case. Okay. So we think about this reseller with a price or a cost 20 would leave if the price is any lower. Okay. Find the total producer surplus for price 20. So we need to intersect here and then calculate the area below the price and above the supply curve. Then if the price rises to 30, we will need to find the increase in producer surplus due to selling 5 additional units and getting higher price on the initial 10 units. I'll explain about those graphically so that you understand. The first part, we explain about it. You intersect 10 with the supply, or with the producer, with the supply curve. I'm very sorry, with the supply curve. So we would have here 20, and that's the price. This is the marginal reseller, the one who leaves the market if the price is any lower in this case. Now what we need to do, we need to calculate this area below the price and above the supply curve. And how do we calculate it? We have this base and height. Height is 10 and the base is 20. Multiply 10 times 20, that's 200, divided by 2, that's 100. That's the total producer surplus. And if the price rises to 300, we need to calculate the two effects joining, some resellers joining the market. Now look at this triangle. Okay, so additional 5 units. How do we know 5? Now when we say the price rises to 30, intersects with the supply curve at this point, which is actually representing 15 in quantity. So between 15 and 10, that's 5 extra. Okay, so due to that, we will have this rectangle. That's the actually the total, or the additional, not total, the additional producer surplus due to those joining the market. Okay, so those new joining the market. And in that case, it's a triangle. We have 10 as a base and 5 as a height. So that's 5 times 5, 25. Half the base times the height. Okay, and then we have the other one, increase in the producer surplus on initial 10. We have initial 10 units. So we have the square. Okay, so it's 10 times 10. That's the total, not total, that's the extra producer surplus due to higher price on selling the first 10 items. 10,000 we can say in this case. But we have these two added to the original producer surplus at price 20. So we have extra additional values, and usually we ask these questions, so you pay attention to how to calculate those contributions to the total producer surplus. So now we need to calculate, and we need to come to a conclusion about the consumer surplus, CS, producer surplus, PS, and the total surplus from the market. Now think about the consumer surplus. We said the value to buyers, okay, the willingness to pay minus the amount paid by the buyers. So this is the gain from the market, and we gave example about it. For the producers, PS is the amount received by the sellers minus the cost to sellers. Now look, the amount received, amount paid, the amount paid by buyers is exactly the amount received by sellers, okay, in the free market we assume, right? So in this case, we have value to buyers minus cost to sellers, the total producer and consumer surplus, the total, in total. If we sum up CS and PS, what would we get? We would get this kind of combination, which is actually value to buyer minus cost to sellers. So what is the total surplus, consumer and producer, from joining the market? So let's just rearrange our ideas. Value to buyers minus amount paid by buyers, that is the total gain for buyers from joining the market, and the amount received by sellers minus the cost to sellers, okay, that's the seller's gain from participating in the market. So the total surplus is summing up CS plus PS, or the consumer surplus plus the producer surplus. And now remember, the amount paid by the buyer in a free market is exactly the amount received by the seller, okay? So amount paid by buyers is equal to amount received by sellers, so they will cancel each other here, and what will happen? We will have value to buyers, okay, minus cost to sellers. That is the total surplus from participating in the market for both producers and consumers. So this is what we refer to by market's allocation of resources. Now assume that we don't have any centralized force, the market is free, so it is motivated by the self-interest of buyers and sellers. So buyers would buy if they appreciate the product and if they have the willingness to pay for it, and sellers will produce the product if their cost is any lower than the price available in the market. So the product or the service will be produced by the one who's appreciating it most and willing and able to produce it by the lowest cost possible. And the buyers those who will buy it, the ones appreciate it most and have the highest willingness to pay, producing it on average, of course. So we speak about hundreds of thousands of transactions, or maybe millions of transactions in this regard. All right. So will this allocation produce the most efficient way of market allocation of resources, or can we improve it? So let's see if we can improve it or not. If we say a market is efficient, that means there is no way better than the current that produces a better allocation of resources, or a more efficient allocation of resources. So when we say we have a market that is efficient, then we are assuming that the sellers who are producing, or the producers who produce the products, are the best to produce it, and the ones who consume the product, the buyers, are the ones who appreciate it most. So let's see, this is the well-being of the market economy in this case. Now let's put any policy aside. Let's not just think about equality or equity and so on. Let's just think about efficiency at the beginning, then we will speak about the rest of factors if there's any government intervention is needed. All right, so we said about efficiency in this case is the total surplus. Total surplus is the measurement of efficiency, which is the value to buyers minus the cost to sellers. So in that case, what we need to do, we need to see if this allocation is efficient, if it maximizes the total surplus. If this method or this way maximizes the total surplus, then our market is efficient, our allocation of resources is efficient. If it doesn't, then we can improve the market. So in that case, if the total surplus is maximum, we can never maximize it more than that, then we have the goods consumed by the buyers who value them most or appreciate them most, and produced by the producers with the lowest costs. Okay, so any change in the total surplus in that case will not bring any good, wouldn't benefit. It will just reduce the total surplus. We cannot maximize more than the maximum in that case. Okay, so let's just think about it. If the free market is on its own working efficiently or not. Now what we have here is just an assumption of the supply and demand curves, and what we need to do, we need to see if we can improve the equilibrium. So at the equilibrium, we have a price of 30, we have 15, or you can say 15,000 or whatever, okay, quantity demanded. Now let's assume, okay, before assuming, this is the consumer surplus, the area below the demand curve and above the price, and this is the producer surplus, below the price, above the demand supply curve, and this is the total surplus from participating in the market. Okay, that's CS plus PS total as an area. Okay, now this is at the equilibrium. Whether it is efficient or not, we will see soon enough. Let's just assume we will take some point somewhere here and another point somewhere here, okay, and see. Now remember that these buyers here are participating in the market, right? Their willingness to pay is higher than 30 and above, okay? Not higher, 30 and above, okay? Those are not actually, because their willingness to pay is lower than 30, and that for that reason they wouldn't join, okay? They wouldn't buy. And those buyers who have willingness to pay a WTP less than 30 will not likely to join the market due to their limitation. Now, what will happen? Let's just discuss the producers. Those with the cost lower than 30 would produce and resell or sell the product or good or service less than equal 30. Those who have higher than 30 as cost wouldn't join the market. So the sellers with lowest cost will sell the good, and again here, maybe I forgot to say it, the buyers with highest or the high payments would join the market, not the lower ones. Okay, and this is the idea. So we are maximizing actually. If we take any point somewhere here, now let's say we take a price above 30 sorry so we take the price above 30, let's say 35, what happens? So in that case, we will have some point here at the supply curve, okay, and we have another point at the demand curve here. The supply curve stays 35 and the demand curve stays 20, and in that case we have different marginal actually buyer and seller. And what will happen? Actually, we are not having the full capacity of consumer and producer surplus. We can maximize it by moving towards the equilibrium. Why? That will give us additional. Now look, for producers, for consumers, now look, we have the demand, we have the consumer surplus lower than the one at the equilibrium, and for the supply also we have one lower than the one at the equilibrium, and for that reason what we have is a way to maximize it. How can we maximize it? We move towards the equilibrium. If we move towards the equilibrium, this area will be maximized. We will have higher, each time it will be increase until we reach to the equilibrium. Once we reach to the equilibrium, we will have these two triangles together, the consumer surplus and the producer surplus, and that's the maximum in that case. If we try from this side, let's say a price 25, which is 10 quantity demanded. Now we have also again the same. The intersection with this supply curve and the demand curve represent two different points, which can be maximized if we move towards the equilibrium. Now look, we have here one different area, another different area, and that's for that reason we have less total area. Why? Look, we have a loss here, this triangle, we have a loss here, this rectangle, and we have only this one plus this one. If we move towards the equilibrium, what will happen? We will have all of it together. So we can maximize by moving towards the equilibrium, and this is exactly what we have in the free market. In the free market, we have equilibrium on its own. The quantity demanded is equal to the quantity supplied, and that produces actually an efficient market. So what maximizes the consumer surplus and the producer surplus all in total, all together, is actually leaving the market on its own. So the free market actually is efficient. Those who produce the goods and services are the ones who can produce them with the lowest cost, and the ones will consume them or buy them, those who appreciate them most or value them most. Okay, and that's exactly the idea of having a free market without actually interference from governments or any central authority. Usually any interference creates a negative impact, but as I said earlier, we may have some interference due to some reasons. If the resources are not equally distributed, or the prices are not fair due to some manipulation in the market. If you remember the externality, for example, we spoke about it. We spoke about different other aspects where the government should interfere, but it shouldn't interfere in normal circumstances. If the goods and services are provided with no problem, there is no shortage due to some manipulation of the market, then let the market on its own. And that's what they refer to it by laissez-faire. It's a French word. I'm not sure if I pronounce it correct. Laissez-faire. Yeah, laissez-faire. So this is the idea of allowing the market to work on its own without interference, without having centralized authority over the market. All right. So in that case, we don't need a central planner. Why we don't need a central planner? Now, in order for us to achieve the maximum benefit from a market, we need to know the equilibrium. How can we know the equilibrium if we have the central authority, or if we are the central planner? We need to ask every seller and every buyer. Every seller the best price that fits him while selling the product or the service, and every buyer the best price that fits his budget as well. How can we know the willingness to pay and the willingness to sell of all these? We cannot. So you leave the market, it will stabilize by itself and it will reach to the equilibrium based on normal circumstances, and that is much more efficient than planning it centrally. Okay, so in the conclusion, as I said earlier, usually markets on their own are efficient, but the intervention of governments usually is needed. Why? We spoke about externalities a while ago. We said that sometimes due to some misuse of the way of production, like pollution, noise, whatever, think about it, like sometimes market biasing, someone is controlling the whole market, the unfair sometimes prices available in the market. These usually need to be considered by the government, but not in every aspect. Otherwise, the market will fail on its to achieve the maximum surplus. Rather, it should be left to its own to stabilize around the equilibrium, and in that case, we can achieve the maximum benefit or gain from the market. That's it for this chapter. I hope you guys would enjoy these videos and benefit from them. Until our next chapter, have a good time. Goodbye.